Good morning. I'll now call this meeting
There's external pressures, there's internal pressures. I'll give you the easy one that everyone's going to first think of, CPI, Consumer Price Index. So that is external, and you can put that as number 1 on the list, CPI. And then I'm going to ask these 2 tables to go over in this corner with Catherine, and these 2 tables to go over in that corner with Carol, and have a discussion about what you think are all the different internal and external pressures on the tax rate.
Hello.
Looks like we're ready to resume. So I'm going to ask Carol and Catherine. Okay, so I'm going to read out what was on my list, and it's very interesting. I think we've got, between all of us, I think we should have a pretty good list of what pressures are on the budget. And I'm going to, after I finish reading these out, when you're on break, I'll ask Carol and Catherine to write anything that's different of mine, if there is any, on another sheet there, so that we can see all of them. And so I'll start with the internal pressures. And the first one I have, and if it's on your list somewhere, then tick it in red. Maintain existing service levels. No red line. Okay. This is a really key one because you can have more population coming in. That means it impacts the service levels that we're delivering. I'll use Treasury as an example simply because it's easy for me to do. The more household accounts, water accounts, tax accounts, the more we have to serve those, and that creates more work. And at a certain point, you run out of capacity of resources to service the existing, and you have to increase costs to be able to continue to service those accounts. More roads that might be required because we have new population, new developments coming in. But just to maintain those existing service levels, not to enhance them, just to keep delivering what we have been, there's a cost associated with that, and it can be a big cost. Asset management, maintenance and replacement costs. Tick, very good. Council priorities. Tick. Staffing requirements in terms of the head count. Okay, good. Investing in the future, meaning that we're contributing to our reserves to build them back up for the future. Okay, that's one we didn't get. Community safety and well-being. We may want to invest some monies in our community safety and well-being. Yeah, okay, we'll take that. Community safety and well-being. It could be, but I consider it a separate one as well because as for example, car rallies is an example that's not under the council priorities, but it is a community safety issue. Employee support and engagement. Our employees are our main asset. We must invest in them. We must help groom them for the future. An important cost that we have to invest in. Training, yeah, development. Financial sustainability and affordability. These are pressures on our thing. We know that we have to be financially sustainable. We also have pressure of how affordable is it for our tax base to be able to. So, but no, I would say it's not those. It's more. It's a pressure of how much can we afford to do in general, and how much do we have to do in order to be financially sustainable. Even if it doesn't feel affordable, we still might need to do it just to be able to deliver what we have to as a municipality. Staffing costs in terms of competitive wages and benefits. We have costs that we increase each year for that. Enhancements to service levels, and this is where we want to do something we haven't offered before. So I'll use windrow is an example of something that we haven't done before for snow removal for the seniors. That's an example of an enhancement to our service levels. Annualization of prior year budget decisions, and this is a very large one. Sorry, Councillor Blanchet? Oh, I thought you might have had a comment, sorry. So annualization of prior year's budget decisions, and we're going to see that in the next exercise we do, of just how material that number can be. There are things of decisions that were made in prior years that we now have to take into our budget, and we have to incorporate them in. So we're going to see that in our next exercise. So those were the 11 internal ones that I had. And now for external, I had CPI, Consumer Price Index, and then I had the Non-Residential Building Construction Price Index, which is short form NRBCPI. And that's what is driving our construction costs. And so much of our capital program is construction-based, and that is the rate that is more reflective of what the costs are going to be on all our capital program that is construction-oriented. And we're going to see at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about those two rates and how they differ. Legislation, such as Bill 23, Bill 108, and Asset Management Regulation 588-17. So we got legislation. Citizens' opinions. That puts pressure on our budget, you know, and we have to listen, and that's why we want to have our engagement. Growth and development, such as new subdivisions, condos, commercial buildings. So we've got growth. It could also be population. It drives the same. Okay, utilities. Large pressure on the budget comes from utilities. And then I have municipal CPI, and I just want to explain that in the difference. There's the standard CPI that everyone is accustomed to hearing about, and that's based on a certain basket of goods that the average household would use for fuel, mortgage, rent, food, the things that they incur in a typical family environment. But a municipal's world isn't the same as that. Our basket of goods is different. We have construction, we have staffing, we have some fuel and fleet costs, but they're much more expensive than typical in the basket of goods for the homeowner. So municipal CPI can be slightly higher than the regular CPI. So we consider that. Climate change. We know that we have some climate change matters that we want to address. Environmental protection, such as energy. Those are some other areas that we might, I think we have something in our council priorities related to that. Commercial sector, the opinions of our commercial sector and what they want us to do and provide for them, and that could influence some of the programs that we run. And phase-in, the phase-in of the assessment. So those are the ones that I had. It looks like we got a really good list on between all groups, and that I think was really helpful, and it helps put in your mind some of the things that we've got to think about as we decide that 34.4 million and what it buys us. So at this point, we're now at our break time. You get a 15-minute break. You can go check your emails if you want and all those things, or just have a break. And then at 11:15, we'll start in on the, we're going to look at that 34.4 million. What did it change? It was 31.9 for 23, and it went to 34.4. Why? What caused it to go up there? We're going to look at those numbers and have some discussion around that. Are there any questions on this part? Are we good? Yep, okay. All right, take a break, and we'll be back in 15 minutes. Okay, so we're back, and we've had a bit of a break. We've had a chance to talk about some of the pressures on the budget, and Catherine and Carol have added the ones that I had. She's added them to those lists there, so feel free to look at them later if you want to have a sense of them, take a picture of them or something, just to keep them in mind. Those are things we have to think about. And at this point, we're going to now talk about how the budget changed from 2023 to the 2024 forecast. What did we include? And you have in front of you, and I'm going to ask Amol if you can put up document 1 on the screen. And you have in front of you a reconciliation that shows the opening budget of 23 of 31,872. So that's how much tax we raised in 2023. And these next things I'm going to list are things we had to add to that number for 2024. And the first one is we added a lot of new staff in 2023, but they didn't all start on January 1st. Some started second quarter, some third quarter, and so we didn't have a full 12-month salary in the 23 number. So now in 2024, we have to take full 12 months for all those new staff positions, and that's 1.3 million approximately cost to annualize those positions. We also have to apply our COLA and STEP to our existing staffing complement base for the 24 year. And that adds approximately 558,000 to apply the COLA and STEP across all staffing. We also, in the budget, we had a couple of positions we wanted to add in 23, but we couldn't afford to, so we pushed them to 24. And the two positions were an economic development officer and a planner 1. That added another $240,000 to the budget. And then we get to, well, Jerry, what you mentioned earlier, the policing cost. Well, we've estimated it based on 5%, which is what it went up in 2023. So that adds another $262,000 to the budget. And then we have to start paying for the new arena and library. And we're either going to be debenturing or we're going to be carrying construction financing interest costs, one or the other. But assuming a debenture in the budget, that adds $1.2 million to the taxation to pay for that debt. At the time when we built the 24 forecast, we knew we wanted to do the walk-in clinic, so we put into the budget $175,000 to start the walk-in clinic. And subsequently to that, we have since made a decision to set a budget for the walk-in clinic of $300,000, and we're taking a good portion of that from the casino revenue reserve. So this will change a bit for us, and this might be a little bit of a savings for us in terms of this number, because we've got it in the taxes right now. However, it will phase in over time to be in the taxation base, so we have options there that we can consider. In 2023, we looked at the fire master plan needs to be done. We wanted to put it in 23. We couldn't afford to, so we pushed it to 2024. So we've got $75,000 there to complete the fire master plan. There are some other costs for the arena and the library that have increased. These are not staffing related. The staffing related costs are up in the top number, the 1.3 million. The other costs associated with the new building for the arena are $143,000, and for the library, $94,000. Pardon me? Can we get an example of what those might be? Utilities, like the arena, to run the 2 ice rinks. In our budget, our utility costs for hydro would be much higher. So that's an example, one that comes to mind quickly. But it's just a bigger building, so compared to what running a single arena and a smaller library, you're going to have higher operating costs when you open the brand new building. We also had in our 23 budget $130,000 towards work that we might need to do for the beachfront development. And in 23, we pulled from the reserve to cover that expenditure. But in '24, we still maintain that number as a placeholder because there's going to be things that come up when you start to do a big plan like that. And so we have 130,000, but now we're not pulling it from the reserve anymore. It's going into the tax base. So that's the 130,000 on the list. In general, all these different things we talked about here, internal and external pressures, there was increases added for some of those things. And in summary, those total 595,000. You're going to have indexing, insurance costs, fuel, new vehicles or replacement vehicles, different things in there. Not replacement vehicles, but fuel costs more than that, because this is operating. Then what we're going to remove out of the number is we had some one-time initiatives that were in 2023 that will not repeat in 2024. So we're going to remove 434,000. We also, the amount of taxation required for the capital program in 2023, it was higher than what the capital program cost in '24 is. So we remove 494,000 out of the budget because our capital taxation requirement is lower based on what we projected we'd be doing in '24. However, if we did all that, our tax rate increase wouldn't be 3.89%. It was going to be very, very high because we had a lot of costs coming into the budget all in 1 year. So we've done some tax rate stabilization and phased in some of these costs. And so I've removed there 1.2 million, which is the tax rate stabilization number, that we're going to phase in. We're going to pull from reserve, and we're going to phase that number in, because otherwise the tax rate pressure will be too high. And that's how we got to the 34.4 million that we need for the 2024 forecast. Not a lot on here that we can change. A lot of this is based on decisions made in prior years. And we have to take these costs into 2024. We haven't even talked about some of the new things that we want to do, or new staffing needs we might have, or other things, new enhancements. Councillor Blanchet?
It's not on your list, but did you maintain council priorities at the same level as last year?
That was where I was going to go next, yes. So we put into the budget in 2023, it was a total of approximately 500,000 that we put to cover council priorities. That stayed in the base in 2024. So we know that to do council priorities, we have that 500,000 still in this 34.4 million. It's already there. We also know that in 2023, we haven't spent it all. So we're likely going to carry over possibly 200,000-300,000 from 2023 to add into the 500,000. So that's what we've got to work with for council priorities, and that's a perfect thing that we're going to talk about next soon, is the council priorities. So that gives you a sense of, if you want to do a council priority, that if you have them more than that, obviously that number goes up, 34.4, or if you have them less, it could come down. But that base number of 500,000 allows you, if we just keep that in the base, it allows you throughout your 4-year term to balance those council priorities where you need to do them. It's enough money to keep them moving, and it's in the base. So the next thing that I wanted to do, if I could ask Carol and Catherine to hand out the tax rate percentage change chart. And thank you, Amal, if you can put up the second one.
Thank you.
Sure.
Rate stabilization, we only use that for one-time costs, not reoccurring costs, right?
Either one-time costs or if I'm phasing. If you're phasing in a big cost and you know you can only do it for 2-3 years, and it's a fixed amount, We can phase that in through tax rate stabilization. Could you pay for ongoing costs permanently? No, absolutely not. Reserves can't be used, they're not sustainable that way. But they can bridge, and they help because you want to stabilize that tax rate impact, so we can bridge that. Unfortunately, when you need to incur a cost, it doesn't always fit well into the timeline of the tax rate percentage increase. It just, when you need to add that much staff all at once, you need them, you can't wait. At the same time, the impact would be too extreme if we just take the hit all at one time. So it's more logical to use the reserves and phase that into the tax rate base, and then once it's in there, it will be fine. So that was a good question. So now you have in front of you a tax rate percentage change and levy revenues chart. And this is a table that I'm hoping is going to be helpful. So back at the room there, I have 24 target tax rate percentage change. And I have the current forecast was at 3.89, and the MPAC projection is 4.6. And this table is sort of when we get to September, when we want to set the target tax rate, it's going to help you have a sense of, if you choose a target tax rate, how much money do we get in relation to our 34.4 budget? You know now what's in your 34.4, but if that isn't enough, and we need more, you can see here is circled on the chart the 2.5 million that we have in there right now at 4.6. You can see what the different amount of money is that we would receive in order to do the different things that you might want us to do and build into the budget. You can also see there at the top of the chart that if we move the tax rate percentage change by 0.25%, the town will get $82,000 more in revenue based on, we have to make that assumption at this point in time that that's going to be our assessment base. We won't know that until it actually closes the roll. But for now, that's the best number that we have, best information. And based on that, which is you see that tax, that assessment base number is up at the top there. Based on that assessment base, 0.25% more in the tax rate gives us $82,000 more in revenue. A 1% increase in the tax rate gives us $330,000 more in taxation revenue. So it just gives you a little bit of a quick chart to reference when you're trying to decide what's the tax rate that you want to set and have staff build the budget to. You get a sense of how much dollars we have to work with, and the previous chart we looked at gives you a sense of how we spent the 2.5 million that we needed. Are there any questions about this table and the previous one? Councillor Blanchet?
Yeah, we haven't talked much about grant funding, and I know that's not a surety, but as we go through a year, if we were to get a significant grant on a project that's in our budget, then we could just adjust mid-year, that we may have an opportunity to do something else. But obviously our grant funding does fluctuate year to year.
And it does. Some grant funding, if we're pretty confident that we're going to get the grant funding, we may build it into the budget. But we need to be really confident of that before we do it. Most of the time we don't. We do have a grant funding amount of $25,000 that we use to help us have money so that when we find that opportunity that happens during the year we didn't know about, that we have a budget we can go to and say, okay, we can match some dollars. Maybe we need to put 10,000 in to get 10,000. So we have a bit of a budget there. And then if we get grant money during the year and we had planned to use taxation to pay for a certain project, but then we get the grant money, a couple of things could happen. We could choose to use the money during the year to spend on something else, or the money could just fall out into the surplus, and then it goes and builds our reserves, and we know we need our reserves to help with tax rate stabilization and one-time initiatives that we want to do. So that's how the grant money is really beneficial, is if we let it just go in and build the reserve, it lets us plan better for future years when we do it that way. Good question. Are there any others? No, we're good? Well, I hope that table will, for council members, maybe help you a little bit in selecting when you're going to be on September, you're going to be providing us with a target tax rate percentage increase. And again, keeping in mind that some of the target tax rate percentage increase we control and some we don't. So some of that might impact how you set the target tax rate. So now we're going to move on and talk about council priorities. So if I could ask Carol and Catherine to hand out the chart on council priorities. And Mol, if you, yes, that's it. That's great, thanks. So the table that you have in front of you is a listing of some of the action items out of the council priority document. And last year when we were setting the 23 budget, Andrew and I reviewed some of these and estimated some dollars for some of them to go into the 23 budget. And you can see there in the column titled 23, those are the amounts that went into the 23 budget. So some of those amounts were standard amounts that we have in our budget already, such as the $25,000 for transit for shelters. We have that in our budget already, but it was a council priority. Also, the $160,000 for green fleet vehicles, that was in the building budget, which doesn't impact taxation, but it was part of the council priority. And then for 24, 25, and 26, we have put in the amount here for the shelters as well as the walk-in clinic. And then there's a bunch of ones there. And the ones are things that we don't have an estimate yet for, that we need to think about. And so what I'd like you to do now is, again, go back to the wall, and I'd like you to come up with, looking at these priorities now and knowing what you know about things and how much money we have, what do you want us to focus on in 24, 25, and 26 from these council priorities, so that because that's going to drive our budget when we start to build it. So we need a lot of council influence on what these council priorities are that we should be focused on. So if you can, Catherine and Carol can write down on the sheets what you think is really important. Just have some discussion around the priorities and the dollar costs that you think maybe that would be incurred to execute those priorities in the different years. I'll give you a minute, you can look at them, and then if you just want to go back to the groups. I'd like them for whatever they want. If they think something should be done in 25 or 26, that's okay there. I'm just going to ask if everyone can return to their table and... Sorry, that's okay. That's good, that's good. So it looks like we got some ideas about what were the priorities. And maybe I could just ask, Catherine, can you just read what's on your list? Sorry, short-term? Rental strategy. Okay, thank you. And Carol, can you read your list? Okay, so that's good. We had some common themes going on both lists. And I'll tell you when I do the recap what you can do with this information afterwards. So I have one last task that we're just going to do, and then I'll do the recap and we'll go from there. So we should be done in about 10 minutes or so. I'm hoping that lunch will have arrived by the time we're done. And you'll be able to either stay here and have some lunch or take it with you. Now, the last part that I wanted to talk about, if I could have Carol and Catherine hand out the last document, and Amal, if you could put that one up on the screen, document 4. Okay, everybody has this sheet. So what we're going to talk about here is what do you do with all these budget pressures? How can you address them? And there are a couple of pretty common ways to address them, but there are risks associated with those options. So the first one is defer the timing of capital projects by prioritizing critical projects and delaying low-level items. And the risk is that low-level projects still are required to be completed at some point, and if the delay is not monitored relative to need, there is a potential for a problem to arise as a result of the delay. So the degree of the problem could range from it's manageable to it's significant and serious and may result in unexpected liabilities through equipment failure or equipment functioning below being maintained in a state of good repair. So yeah, we can defer some of our capital projects, but some of those projects might need to go forward and prevent a bigger problem later down the road. So that's one way to minimize things, because a portion of our capital program is paid through taxation. Approximately $3.5 million of our 34.4 number, approximately $3.5 million comes from the capital program. So then a second option is we can increase the borrowing for the municipality. There is still room in the municipality's annual repayment limit, which for 2023 was $9.7 million. And the carrying cost of debt at the end of December 2022, we were carrying $1.7 million. So out of a $9.7 million that were allowed, at the end of 22, we were carrying 1.7. However, this is expected to increase to approximately $3.5 million. So we're allowed 9.7 and we're going to go up to 3.5, and that's because of the new Arena Library borrowing costs when we take that debenture out. Most municipalities are running closer to around the 20-25% of the envelope, so 20-25% of the 9.7. So we're going to go higher than that when we take on our debt for the Arena Library. So to add even more debt would be getting quite higher on the risk side of things. And as well, we need to keep a portion of that 9.7 million envelope, because if water sewer breaks, we have to be able to repair that. And we might need to go into debt to do that. Or if there's a major infrastructure item that we really want to do, we're going to want that envelope. So there are lots of good reasons not to take that debt on. It's easy to sign the paper, but it's not a recommended way to balance the budget if you don't have to. Make certain projects or programs solely grant dependent. There are some projects where this strategy is logical to apply. The risk is valid projects may have to be forfeited if grant funds are not awarded. Grant funds will often help a project get started. However, following startup, there may be ongoing commitments required for operational costs. If the project is only to be funded if grant funds are received, then it would also be important to assess whether any ongoing costs will be required, and if so, how will those costs be funded? A fourth item is increase the amount of funding through reserves. Reserve funding is suitable for one-time project costs, phasing in costs or bridging needs for situations where sustainable funding is still being sought or deferred to another year. Such bridging decisions should identify the appropriate time when the reserve funding is no longer to be used and the sustainable source of funding will be in place. So you can do it temporarily, but you have to have a long-term plan of how is it going to be financially viable. And the risk of this is utilizing reserves at a faster pace than they are replenished could leave the town short of funding options for future projects. Reviewing the long-term 10-year capital plan in conjunction with short-term budget years is essential for informed decision-making. Minimum reserve levels should be maintained to accommodate unforeseen occurrences requiring immediate funding. Reserves can be used if the reserve is above minimum requirement levels. And so we might have a reserve that has a minimum target level of maybe 200,000, and that reserve's sitting up at 400,000. Okay, we can tap into that reserve comfortably and know that we could use some of those funds. And our last one I have on the list here, and it's not that these are all there is, this is just the 5 main ones that I chose to cover here. Change service levels. Example, reduce the service levels. This option could have the impact of permanently reducing ongoing operational costs or removing the need to increase operational costs to maintain existing service levels. And the risk of reducing service levels may lead to taxpayer complaints, longer waiting periods for essential services, or lower the town's attractiveness to outside tourists or incoming residents or commercial businesses. So those are some options. They're there. They're things that we can consider doing. They have risks attached to them. So as you can see, when you look at everything we've talked about today, which is the tax rate and what we control of that tax rate percentage change and what we do not, and what are the pressures on the budget, the things that are there but coming externally and internally, and what are the priorities that we want to see get done in the budget, and what are the things that we have to put into the budget because of prior year decisions, and ways to mitigate the budget pressures. Councillor Blanchet?
Yeah, I just have a question, Jocelyn. When we were at AMO conference, the last presentation was the top economist from CIBC, and he gave us a economic outlook for the coming year. So my question is, we know that we're going to move from construction loan to a debenture, approximately $32 to $34 billion. And when we do that,
So I've been really hoping for that to materialize. And one of the things we did when we did our financing for the Arena Library, the strategy we took is we'll use construction financing. And that allowed us to draw on a loan, credit line, as we needed to draw on it. And we mitigated how much we drew on that line by using our own reserves and using internal leveraging and financing where we could. But we did have to draw, and so far we've drawn 12 million of that line. So as we get to the end of this quarter, we're going to have to draw a lot more, because now we're into the big payout, the final payments going out. In this last quarter, we're going to see a lot of money go out, and we'll have to use it. However, it's still under a construction financing loan until, and I think I've got this right, September of 2025. Yeah, I think it's September of 2025. So we have a choice. We can continue to pay the interest on how much we've borrowed, and wait for the interest rate to come down before we lock in our long-term 30-year debenture and see what we can pay down of that. Or we can lock in if the interest rate were to drop and we want to lock it in, we can lock it in. And that was the advantage of the 5-year construction financing. When we took it out, the construction financing rate was half of 1%, and that was an excellent rate to be paying. Unfortunately, it's now up around 4.7% approximately today. So it's a balancing. We have to look at, is it worth locking in the debenture at this interest rate versus paying this high interest cost on the construction financing? And that's a calculation that we'll be doing and monitoring in the coming months. So we still have about a year and a half of time left before we have to lock the debenture in. Hopefully, it's going to work in our favor in that interest rate. When I did the budget for the debenture, I budgeted it at an interest rate of, I believe it was around 2.6 or 2.7%. So the closer we get to that, the closer we are to what we actually budgeted for when we did this. We've got some flexibility. We have a good tool in place. It's a matter of what happens, and if it were to come down, like you just said, the economist said, that would be excellent for us. And we might get that back down to a good rate. So today, TD's rate for long-term loans, I think, is 5.7%. Infrastructure Ontario is lower than that. I wasn't able to get into the site this morning to check the rate, but the rate would be lower on Infrastructure Ontario than what the commercial rate is with the banks. We may also split some of the debt. We might put some of the debt on a commercial loan, the way we did with the beachfront when we purchased the land. We split the debt between Infrastructure Ontario and a commercial bank, so that, because the commercial bank you can pay off a little sooner. Once you lock in with Infrastructure Ontario, you can't. There's no paying that off early without paying practically the entire amount you owed, and it's not worth it. So we have some tools, we have some options, and we just need the economy to work in our favor a little bit better too. So good question. Are there any other questions about what we talked about today? Councillor Eagle?
Yeah, I'm just looking at what we need money, and I have no idea, but we have a lot of building going on in this town. Do we ask or require the developers to contribute well to our community for parks, for the money? We're at a conference at AMO on Parks and Recreation, and the point I came across with there, or what I took away, was always ask for the land. So are they giving a good share back to us for coming into our community? Are we getting all that we could possibly get from the developers?
So I'm probably not the right person to answer that question. Someone from our planning department, if they wanted to jump in, would be welcome to. But I would say that in the past we have gotten reasonable amounts of land contributed as park area. With the Bill 23, it's changing the way that is calculated now, and I don't think that's as much in our favor. So, do you want to respond?
In our favor, but we can always negotiate bargain, can we not?
We can ask, but it is a legislated piece, so we really can't do too much with that. You know, you could always ask the developer. I think that's always an option. But I would say bottom line is, if the developer doesn't want to give it, legally, they're within their rights not to. Certainly, we should always try to reach out for the best for the community. That would be a good strategy to take to any development. We-
So for consent applications, we generally take the cash in lieu, which is generally 5% of the value of the lands. When it's larger development like plans and subdivision, generally what we try to do, Kevin also has input on this, we try to take the land. And sometimes you want to take a combination, you can take the land and you can take cash at the same time, and you can use that cash to actually program the park space that you're getting through the contribution to the conveyance of the property. So there's many ways to do it. Yeah, so it's generally 5% for residential, and commercial and institutional or industrial is 2%. So we see, most times when you see commercial, generally we take the money. Just for residential plans of subdivision, generally we try to take the money.
They will also typically donate, dedicate above the park blocks, open space, so your creek corridors and NEP type lands are then dedicated on top of that park dedications. You usually get more than that once anyways from the planning.
I guess that's what I was saying, I guess we could hope to ask for more than the minimum, when we're such a sought after area to be in, and we want to build here, but
Yeah,
that's all I'm saying.
yeah, to Jocelyn's point, it's difficult to leverage when it's set out in a legislative requirement.
I want to really appreciate it. Thanks, all right, thank you.
Deputy Mayor Snell?
Thank you for putting this together. This has been really, really helpful for me. One of the questions I wanted to ask is, in this process, are we also going to be, are we going to be going through brainstorming ways to increase revenue and not coming from the taxpayer, but whether we're looking at increasing fees or TCs, when was the last time the TCs were increased, things like that, where we can look at creatively at increasing revenue.
Certainly, in our internal discussions amongst staff, increasing the revenue is one of the things we will be looking to for all of our budgets. We can also, when we have our public forum, invite any ideas, suggestions at that time as well. But staff automatically, in their budget process, will look, should we be increasing our rates and fees? Is there a new revenue stream opportunity here? Each budget individually does look at that. And then when we present our budgets, that's when we would bring forward those new revenue opportunities and present them as part of the budget, and then they would be incorporated into our rates and fees bylaw, depending on what it is. Thanks. Any other questions? Okay, so what do you do with all this information? On September, in our September meeting, we're going to come back and have a request at that time to actually ask council to set that percentage target tax rate increase. And what I'm hoping you'll be able to do is go away with the documents that you've got, the conversations that you've had, and be able to come back on that date with a potential target tax rate increase, as well as those council priorities. You'll have time now to think about them. You have a list in front of you, you've had some discussion. Give us some leadership in terms of council priorities when we talk on the September meeting as well. And then at that time, we're also going to, as part of the staff report, there was a list of assumptions and priorities. We'll be looking to have those approved at that time too. Some of the rates were not filled in for this staff report. That's because those rates will set them closer to when we're actually ready to participate in that time. Whatever is the most current information available on CPI, non-residential construction price index, and other things. We'll have those rates, and then we'll go through those assumptions. So if you can take a look at the assumption list that's in the staff report for today's meeting, and also give some thought to that about whether there's anything that would be of concern on September, or if you can just approve that on September for us, that would be great too. Councillor Belanger?
The timing of the public engagement at the Recplex, will that be fairly early? Because, again, you know, we view the world as with our priorities, but, you know, certainly I'm sure some of our residents will come up with other priorities. And it would be helpful that we have that information pretty early in the process.
So October 12th is the date that we present draft 1 of the budget, and it's going to be based on these assumptions and target tax rate that you give us on September's meeting. October 16th is the meeting at the Recplex. So they'll have just heard what we have presented for draft 1 based on all the feedback we've had so far, and then they'll have some time to have some input before we go to draft 2, which will be later in I think late November or early December is when draft 2 goes forward. So that should give the public lots of time. As well, following the October 16th meeting, there will be a survey put on the site, and so they'll have the opportunity to comment through the survey if they weren't able to participate in the October 16th meeting. So I think between those multiple sessions and opportunities, I think we should be able to get some pretty good feedback from the public. Councillor Tims? We're still discussing that internally. Kind of like the format where you sit at tables and have conversations. Also, there's the option, though, just for staff to be at the front and answer questions for everyone. So we're kind of looking possibly a hybrid of that, but we haven't really landed on that. We need some direction from Andrew before we lay out the format of that meeting.
I think that will absolutely be part of that. I've been part of those types of sessions. Mississauga does that, but they actually do a town hall as well. So I think we'll incorporate some of that.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, well, that's it then. Thank you very much, and hopefully you've got lunch out there on the table. And sorry. Yes. Sorry. So thank you.